a school for generations of Palestinians. On May 11th, Shireen was covering the most recent Israeli raid of the Jenin refugee camp. Jenin was a city that she loved and covered repeatedly with integrity and with care during her illustrious career. As she once wrote, Jenin is not one ephemeral story in my career or even in my personal life. It is the city that can raise my morale and help me fly. It embodies the Palestinian spirit that sometimes trembles and falls, but beyond all expectations, rises to pursue its flights and dreams. Together with a team of journalists committed to justice and truth, Shireen sought once again to raise the Palestinian voice stifled under military and media regimes of disavowal and erasure. It was not an accident that this powerful and steady voice was a target of Israeli army fire. The Israeli targeting of the free press is not an accident. The bullet that interrupted Shireen's life, that bullet aimed at just beneath her ear, was not an accident. As the Palestinian Journalists Syndicate reminds us, Israel has killed an estimated 86 journalists since 1967. In the period between 2020 and 2022, until Shireen's murder in May 2022 alone, Israel killed 8 journalists in Palestine, and in particular in the West Bank and Gaza. During its May 2021 attack on Gaza, Israel targeted and bombed a building that housed media offices, including Al Jazeera and the Associated Press. Palestinian journalists are land defenders. The truth from that land is a source of settler colonial fear. The unity of the Palestinian people is a source of settler colonial fear. Nothing made this clearer than the brutal conduct of the Israeli police, who beat and assaulted pallbearers as they carried Shireen's coffin to her final resting place. The unity of a besieged and dispossessed people, and our right to mourn and bury our dead, are powerful threats to a settler colonial power hell-bent on the destruction of our people and fueled by the shameless impunity and hypocrisy of U.S. empire. We know this much after long decades of struggle. No matter how hard they try, they cannot kill the truth. Israel's forces and their attempts to prevent Palestinians from reaching Jerusalem and raising the flag did not deter thousands of people from gathering for the funeral in the Old City, just as funerals across Palestine and the diaspora expressed our grief. As the thousands of Palestinians who gathered in collective grief on the ground in Jerusalem chanted, "We may die, but Palestine will live." Throughout her career, Shireen always centered the most oppressed. No story or person was too small for her. Her commitment to the margins nourished and modeled the present and the future in and of Palestine. She was one of many Palestinian women who faced relentless Israeli aggression and erasure with courage and resolve. In her death, Shireen unites us across various class, political, geographic, gendered, and sectarian divides. Shireen's legacy is Palestinian unity. As a US-based feminist collective, we joined the Committee to Protect Journalists to call for a swift international investigation into the killing of the Palestinian American Shireen Abu Akleh and demand that those responsible be brought to justice. Journalism is not a crime. In commemoration of Shireen's life and legacy, and in the shadow of the 74th anniversary of 1948, and in our own ongoing Nakba, we vow to mourn, to organize, and to resist. We resolve to carry Shireen's legacy. She was and always will be Shireen Abu Akleh from occupied Palestine. Before starting our event today, I'd like to pause and introduce our filmmaker and speaker, Dr. Ahlam Al-Muhtasib. Dr. Muhtasib is the professor of media studies at California State University, San Bernardino. Her research interests include digital communication, social media, social justice, and diasporic communities. Her documentary, 1948, Creation and Catastrophe, was screened at over 20 film festivals and at universities and community organizations throughout the world. The film, co-produced and co-directed with Andy Trimlett, focuses on the year 1948 and its catastrophic consequences on the Palestinian nation, which has originated from her fieldwork in the Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon, Syria, and in Palestine. We are honored to be featuring her work today, and we look forward to an engaging conversation and discussion about Palestinian history, struggle, and ongoing resistance befitting of this particular moment of Palestinian unity, struggle, and resistance. Before handing it over to Dr. Muhtasib, I'd like to remind everyone in the audience to please post their questions and comments in the chat box and or share it with us at the end of Dr. Muhtasib's presentation. This event will be recorded. Thank you. I hand it over to Dr. Muhtasib.
Salam everyone, Assalamu alaikum, marhaba. Hello, nice to have everyone here, and thank you for all your labor, for everyone who participated in this event, which commemorates, of course, our Nakba as Palestinian people. I would like to start by acknowledging that I am actually joining you from the colonized, unceded indigenous lands of the Pichanga tribe of the Liwazano First Nation in Southern California. And before I start, and in remembrance of our amazing hero who lost her life as a result of a brutal crime yet another brutal crime of the Israeli colonial forces, Shireen Abu Aqle, could we please have a moment of silence? Thank you all. I guess I would like to first introduce the film and the idea of the film and how it came about, and then share a few clips from the film. Hopefully we'll have enough time to go through all the clips I prepared, but if we can, that's fine. I could cut it a little bit shorter, and I will comment on each one of them and explain some of the context. So the film started from my field work as a junior scholar, actually. Even before I started my profession and finishing my doctoral studies, I started thinking about knowledge production in different, aspects, different aspects of knowledge production and media production. And I wanted to shift, my focus from media critique because of the terrible, of course, representation by mainstream media in the United States, corporate-sponsored media, of course, of our issues and our struggles, not only as Palestinians, but as indigenous and as brown and black, people. And I thought, one way could be to join or conjoin, my field work in the Palestinian refugee camps in Syria and Lebanon mainly, with a short film or documentary that would document, life away from home, in Shatat, and use it as maybe like a classroom resource. That's how the whole idea started, and I started actually filming in 2006, collecting data and filming. First, I filmed in Syria in the Yarmouk refugee camp before it was destroyed. Of course, I have actually unique images, B-roll, and interviews from the camp, which now exist in shambles, basically. And then I moved to Lebanon and I started working in Burj al-Barajne and Shatila refugee camps before Israel started invading Lebanon and basically, shelling all the areas that I was working in. And so by coincidence, I left to Palestine and I was stranded there for 45 days. I couldn't go back to Lebanon. I actually left the day that the shelling started, before they shelled actually and erased Beirut's international airport, like literally hours before. So anyway, I decided to go back in 2008 and continue my work. But I met, Andy Tremlett, my co-producer, co-director, who, we met actually in an anti-war demonstration. And he was the one who proposed making a film addressed to an average American audience who don't know anything or maybe a little bit or misinformed on the Palestinian struggle. And that was really, like, he had a very strong reason to convince me to change my focus. And he said, like, for him as an average American white person, who had no clue but had a master's degree in Middle Eastern studies, he still couldn't understand anything about the so-called conflict or, what was happening. And it was only when he studied the events of 1948 that he understood the systematic ethnic expulsion of Palestinians to make room for the new state. So he thought that if we really wanted to educate Americans on this issue, that we have to take that approach, to focus on that year, of course, before and after, but mainly that year to explain, because most Americans think that Israel had existed forever, and that's a very old conflict, etc. So I accepted, the offer to join. Of course, not thinking it would take us 10 years to make the film. And we had a lot of hurdles and a lot of obstacles in making the film, including, of course, funding, but other more difficult uh, challenges like interviewing Israelis who would agree to speak on camera about what they did in 1948, or to access the archives, which I hope I will have time to address that, because of the embargo on information by the Israeli government that had been extended several times, actually, until it reached 90 years of prohibition, which means that we can never see the archives until the year 2038. So I will now start. I just want to say that we premiered the film in 2017 at the Arizona International Film Festival, which was a surprise for us among all other places we submitted the film to be premiering in Arizona. But I thought it was great. We had, the audience that we really wanted to reach. It was a full sold out, screening, and it was great to see all these people from Arizona who, were exactly what we were trying to target. And we screened all over the world, from Australia to South Africa to the Arab world, Palestine, etc. So let me now start sharing my screen, and I will start with the introduction of our documentary. But I want to just say a disclaimer that since that was our target audience, we of course simplified things to an extent for an American average audience. And also we try to take them from where they are comfortable with, what they know a lot, which is of course the Holocaust, which they know more than they know about the history of their country or any other, group in the United States, and take them on a slow journey of discovery, culminating with what happened in 1948 and after, and the issue of return and all of the complications that came after. And so if you watch the film on your own, and I send it to the Palestinian Feminist Collective, the link, but you can find it on Tubi, please be patient at the beginning because we do that slow transition. And so I'm going to show you a few of maybe a couple of minutes from the introduction before I move on to the next clip. Can you hear it all first? Can you hear it?
Yes.
There are no signs for them. You won't see them on tourist maps. But if you know where to look, if you remember where to look, you can find them, and hundreds like them across Israel.
هذا بيتنا هو البيت مش فاهم عليك 100% ولا بيت.
To know the stories of these ruined towns and villages is to understand the heart of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. To learn their stories, you must go back to a year that none in the region will ever forget, though some have tried.
It's a black hole. I don't want to think about it.
The feeling of you have a state of your own, a Jewish state. Oh, no one have ever lived such a situation.
It's such a grave injustice, and that is really what hurts you. It's a grave injustice that has not been at all attended to and taken care of.
Only when I answered your question, I knew about it. Yes. I know that I don't want to think about the 48.
I just want to explain that that's actually really synthesizes and summarizes the sentiments among the majority of Israelis we talked to. They didn't want to think about 1948 and they just wanted to continue living with the illusion of a state.
The Israeli-Palestinian conflict can seem impossible to comprehend. By looking at the year that most changed the lives of Israelis and Palestinians, 1948, it becomes possible to understand the forces that drive this conflict today. For Israelis, 1948 was a year of creation. The terrible injustices Jews had faced throughout the world would finally come to an end with the realization of their long sought-after solution, a Jewish state in Palestine. For Palestinians, 1948 was a catastrophe. That one year saw the destruction of hundreds of Palestinian villages and towns, their inhabitants replaced by outsiders from Europe and Russia, and most Palestinians would never see their home again. In the 1800s, Jews across Europe and Russia suffered persecution in many forms. Racial stereotypes of Jews were rampant. Movements called for boycotting Jewish businesses. In many places, Jews were not allowed to attend universities, were forced to live in certain neighborhoods, and were prevented from entering roles in government. In other places, whole towns would rise up against their Jewish populations and attack them en masse.
So let me stop sharing for now. As I said, we had to take the audience on this trip of this is what you usually know, and we acknowledge that. We recognize that, was the case in Europe, but at the same time, that does not necessarily justify what happened, at the hands of the Zionist movement. So we explain what the Zionist movement is. We explain that, the colonization of Palestine happened in stages. First, of course, with European, as part of the European colonization of the area, of course, the British, and issuing the Balfour Declaration, promising a land that at the time when they issued the declaration, they hadn't even colonized at that time, into actually showing that they have been doing this and then facilitating the takeover by the Zionists, of course, and the militarization of the Zionist movement, culminating in the British withdrawing from Palestine as a colonial force, but at the same time making sure they leave behind a new colonial power to take over, which is, of course, the Zionist colonial power, which basically established the state of Israel at the ruins of the Palestinian nation by destroying over 500 villages and towns, between 450 and 500 villages and towns and Palestinian towns. I have a comment from Jackie, optimize the screen share. I'm not sharing now. I just want to say that I'm going to move to the next clip and I will try to maximize the screen, but please let me know if that's not working. So the next clip is, what we do in the film is we move on to discuss that systematic ethnic expulsion in actually chronological order. And when we did the film, we experimented with different styles. We tried to be a little bit artistic and doing flashbacks and going back and forth in a more like scholarly and also artistic approach. But when we tested that editing on, average American audiences, which were mainly my colleagues and my students, they struggled understanding the events. So we changed the whole editing process into a more chronological order to make it easier to understand. And so we took, those events one after the other. And at one point, of course, we address one of the most notorious events, notorious massacres, which was the Deir Yassin massacre, which was very significant, not because it was the most brutal massacre committed by the Zionist forces against Palestinians, but because of how it was employed in the overall plan to ethnically expel. And I'm sorry, I'm not using cleansing because I don't like word. You can read the introduction to Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed to understand some context about, using euphemisms like ethnic cleansing to, express genocide, basically. So to be more accurate, I prefer to use ethnic expulsion. Or you can use the word genocide because it's more expressive of what really has been happening and what is happening until today, or what we call the constant Nakba. So Deir Yassin was employed in a way where it instilled fear in a lot of the Palestinian populations. And the idea was to facilitate, the planned Dalet by the Israelis to expel as many Palestinians or kill in the process as many Palestinians as possible to basically make room for the new proposed state to be created. They didn't even know at that time that it would be called the State of Israel. So I just want to introduce the segment, which is Deir Yassin. I will show you the clip, then I will tell you a little bit about the story behind it, because it was a very fascinating story in itself of how we created a segment that did not originally exist in the documentary because we couldn't find any survivors or any Israelis willing to talk about it. And just as we gave up on that, we were able actually to meet by pure coincidence a survivor from Deir Yassin, among all other places in San Diego. So let me share the second clip now.
Ahlam, before you share it, when you click on share screen, there'll be a button at the bottom that says optimize for video.
When I share screen?
So when you click share screen?
Yeah, it does not allow me to do that. That's the problem.
Oh, okay.
So maybe you make me a host, I could do that, but then I couldn't do other things.
Okay, let's...
Let me see if I click on advanced. Yeah, it's not allowing me.
Okay, try now.
Okay, let me close it and try it again. Still, I think it's because Dana did it through her school. Dana, sorry, I keep on saying Dana. She did it through her school. It has limitations on who could do it.
Okay.
So I apologize. That's the best I could do now.
That's okay. Yeah.
All right. Let's see. All right. So now I'm gonna show the Deir Yassin clip. How does it look now?
Just 2 miles from Costal.
Looks good.
Is it good enough? I could also, let me see, I could do this trick. Oh, that didn't work. All right.
Lay the Arab village of Deir Yassin.
I just want to also warn everyone, we opted not to show very graphic images, and we have to have some graphic images eventually, but the description could be a little bit upsetting. So I just wanted to warn everyone that the description is very graphic.
Just 2 miles from Costal lay the Arab village of Deir Yassin. Early in the morning of April 9th, the same day as the funeral of al-Husseini, fighters from the Irgun set out for the village. Deir Yassin was one of many Arab villages that had signed a peace agreement with a neighboring Jewish village, so they did not expect an attack. The Haganah intelligence officer who reported on Deir Yassin was Mordechai Gechon.
Deir Yassin were only citizens. The village was completely peaceful.
أخوي رحمة الله عليه محمود ضرب سمع الصوت وذا ضرب من هاك المنطقة ويعني 12 ساعة متتالية وهم يقتلوا ويقاتلوا اليهود.
A number of Arabs died resisting the attack, but a far larger group lost their lives well after the battle had ended. In all, Jewish fighters killed about 110 Arabs at Deir Yassin, most of them women, children, and the elderly.
People were mutilated. Hand grenades were simply thrown into houses. Women and children were killed, bodies stuck down wells, jewelry stripped off, fingers cut off, earlobes cut off.
رحت أنا ماشي بعرق الحيط مش من الشارع الرئيسي، من البساتين. الفرن له شباك علشان هو اليهود في الفرن، والنسوان قعدات على الأرض، كل واحدة قاعدة حاطة إيديها على راسها هي، وبقولوا للفران ارمي ابنك بالفرن، ارمي ابنك بالفرن. اسمه حامد. قال له أنا ما برمي ابني. قال له شويه. هم ضربوا الحاج حامد على راسه ومسكوا الولد رموه بالفرن. أنا شفت هالمنظر، شفت هالمنظر ما تمش فيها حيل من مرة يعني. بعدين مسكوا الأب حطوه وراه، قالوا له الحق ابنك. أنا جيت قعدت قلت هلا بيمسكوني، قمت أركض.
After the massacre, they took the people which remained, they took them in a car and went through Jerusalem.
Irgun trucks full of survivors paraded up and down streets in Jewish neighborhoods. Spectators mocked, spit at, and even stoned the villagers.
It was very ugly. After these things, I did not know if I am a Zionist.
After the attack, the Haganah sent men to cover up the atrocities.
They came to me and gave me a platoon of soldiers and told me go there and make orders. So I came there and I was shuddering because I see how the dead were strewn and they were eating sandwiches with marmalade. So sometime I couldn't eat marmalade after that. And then I told them, look here, I'm going to fire and shoot and kill you if you don't clean this up. And so they made graves and buried them. And a few they threw in a well, and everything was apparently clean. And then everything looked peaceful.
But the massacre was not over. Some villagers remained in Deir Yassin, hiding in their homes. For 2 days, Irgun fighters searched for survivors.
مروا مرتين ثلاث ما عرفوش، والله ما شافونا، لولا الولد صار يبكي. أخذوا عزمي صرنا نبكي لأنه ولد أبنا. قال هذا بيبي رجعوه. كمان شباب صفوهم على الحيط حوالي 15 واحد ورشوهم قدامنا. إحنا حملونا في بيك اب نفرمكم نعملكم لحمة قورمة ونبيعكم على العرب. لما وصلنا المنطقة اللي بين العرب واليهود في بيت حلو طابق واحد ولكن العشب هيك ومصدي مع الشتاء على السلك تبع الجيش مصدي كأنه دم. أنا شفته كأنه دم. قلت والله العظيم قلت هذا هو المسلخ اللي بدهم. طلع لي واحد عينين زرق حلو، شخصية محترمة، أبو 18 سنة. قلت له بالله عليك أنت عربي؟ قال لي تفضل ما تخافش، أنتوا عند العرب هلا.
Most of the images of the Deir Yassin massacre are in the archives of the Israeli army. The archive refuses to release many of these images and intelligence reports on Deir Yassin, despite being well past the 50-year embargo for classified documents.
Looking back, I'm still, after all those years, very much shocked, and I feel it is a disgrace on the Jewish state and of the Israelis.
مذبحة دير ياسين كانت هي الحافز الأكبر للقرى اللي تهرب بأولادها وأطفالها وبناتها ونسوانها.
قالوا أخذوا البنات يعني وقطعوا فيهن وسووا كذا ما عندي كذا، هذا خلانا إحنا نشرد.
The massacre at Deir Yassin was far from the only massacre of the war, but it was the most widely publicized.
تسمع كل القرى في مذبحة دير ياسين.
دير ياسين.
في معركة دير ياسين، مش دير ياسين.
دير ياسين، دير ياسين.
Okay. So let me explain a few things about Deir Yassin. Just 1 second before I move on to the next clip. As you saw from the description, that came after, Deir Yassin, and as I said before, was highly publicized, not by the Zionist forces, and was also exaggerated by the Zionist forces. Unfortunately, I've witnessed even some famous Palestinian and Arab scholars fall into the trap of the Zionists by quoting the numbers that they reported in the New York Times. When the Zionists, after the massacre, it was the Etzel were trying to prove themselves as those vicious, capable to attack, unit to the Haganah and the Irgun, the other, terrorist Zionist organizations. And so they wanted also to impress, the other Zionist organizations, because they were treating them as like outsiders or like fringe. And they had a press conference after the massacre, and they were actually reporting, as it was reported in the New York Times, and we have, of course, the original article, over cookies and tea, what they did in Deir Yassin, and they were proud of it. And they reported on over 250 people killed in Deir Yassin. Now, according to Palestinian scholar Hatem Kanane, who actually was the first one to document, in a systematic, way, all the stories, from the survivors of Deir Yassin. He estimated the number to be between 109 and 111. So, unfortunately, a lot of scholars still use the Zionist numbers, which were exaggerated to instill fear in Palestinians and drive them out of their homes and towns. That's number one. And the other thing is the Zionists afterwards actually accused Palestinians of exaggerating the numbers and saying, well, that's the way the Arab mind thinks, in a very racist, of course, stereotypical manners. Oh, they are used to exaggerating things. They came up with those wrong numbers. So what happened also, the third important thing to notice about Deir Yassin, and I'm going to tell you how we came up with the story eventually, which took us 8 months actually of work, is the fact that we know from interviews in different sources with Haganah officials and fighters that the Haganah, contrary to what they claim, knew about the massacre and the plan. Not only that, they actually planted 2 Haganah fighters with the Etzel members to do 2 things. One of them was supposed to be a spy collecting information and intelligence on the Etzel and see how they are doing, kind of like experimenting with what their tactics are and writing those reports. and also informing the Haganah officers about what was happening on the ground. And the other Haganah officer was tasked with taking what we now believe is probably hundreds of images on what happened in Deir Yassin. Those are, these exist, the reports and the images and many other things about Deir Yassin, but they are highly classified, by the Israeli government. The Israeli government's original embargo on information after its creation was 50 years. So that explains why in 1998 you saw all these so-called Israeli new historians, or some call them reformist historians, coming up with their books, Ilan Pape, Benny Morris, Avi Schleim, which we interviewed actually, the three of them, although, they come from different perspectives, but regardless. And they came up with unrefuted evidence from Israeli archives to support what Palestinian scholars have been saying all along, and I want to introduce a book later, maybe by Arif al-Arif in 1950. The first actually scholar to report on the Nakba was Arif al-Arif in his 3 big volumes, who actually collected all these testimonies and information from the ground, with an introduction from Dr. Walid al-Khalidi, not Rashid al-Khalidi, but Walid al-Khalidi, who actually also made sure he copy edited the book. Anyway, so after that came out and became so embarrassing for the government of Israel, and it only declassified part of the information, not the whole thing. Number one, it went back and reclassified a lot of the information that it declassified in 1998, and then there was a big legal battle for years in Israeli courts to go back and reclassify everything and extend the embargo, which they did. So they extended the embargo to 7 years. And just almost 3 years ago, the Netanyahu government extended that once again to 90 years. So we would never really see the archives or know exactly what happened until the year 2038, if we live to the year 2038. So what is the big question is, of course, why? Why is Israel hiding, right? So we know the tip of the iceberg, really, in terms of information. This is what we were able to collect. So the story of Deir Yassin, up until 2014, we were not able to interview Palestinians from Deir Yassin or Israelis who participated. And I mean, probably they existed, but most of the Israelis we approached refused actually to talk to us. You only see the few that who accepted to talk to us. So anyway, in 2014, and as Israel was shelling, again, genocide, continuing its genocide in Gaza, I was participating in all of the protests around, Southern California, from LA to my area of Temecula to San Diego. And in San Diego, every week, an older man, came with his wife, and he would bring her a chair. They were elderly, obviously not in the best health, and they insisted on coming every week. And he was so pleasant, bringing, sweets to the kids, etc. So I insisted on the last time we congregated, I needed to ask him who was he, why is he coming, etc. Because the truce was announced and we knew that probably we wouldn't go to the protest again. So I approached him, I said, Marhaba Ammo, in Arabic, my name is, who are, and he said, oh, it wasn't Uthman Aqal, the one you saw in the clip, but his brother. And he said, I'm a survivor. I said, where are you from? He said, oh, I'm from Deir Yassin, like very casually. I was like, you mean the Deir Yassin? And he said, yes. And I was like, oh my God, we have been searching unsuccessfully, and here someone, down the road from us, right? So this was in post-production, and this is when Andy and I said, well, okay, that's it. We have to finish the film. It has been 8 years. We can't go on. We had to go back in production by 8 months. First, we had to find Ben Gihon, the Israeli Haganah officer who talked in the document. We went through a list of 3 names. One wouldn't talk to us and said, read my book. I wrote a book about that, which we read, but wouldn't talk to us. One couldn't talk. We had health issues and couldn't talk anymore. And the only one who was willing to talk, Gihon, who was not, according to him, in the massacre itself, but came after to clean up, as he said. And by the way, if you view the film itself, some of these clips were edited later, so they look a little bit different in the film. with also the original music and everything else. So that was it, and now we had to dig in the archive. Then we discovered from Uthman Aqad that he had a lot of relatives. Now, his brother asked us to interview the other brother because he said, well, I was 8 years old and I remember, but my brother was 11 years old and he remembers better than me, and he wrote already 3 books. One of them was on Dar Yassin in Arabic. Actually, I think probably it was translated to English. Anyway, so we went and interviewed him, and he also introduced us to other survivors. Many of them are in the United States that we didn't know. And so we did a lot of also interviews for fact-checking. Fact-checking took us forever. I even took Hatem Kanan's book because it was published only in Arabic and translated it into English, very quick translation for me and Andy, and we used it also. So anyway, that's the story of Dar Yassin, and I'm happy we were able to document that, and wish we could document more. We submitted a FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act request, similar to the United States. What they have something similar in Israel. Of course, it sat on the desk of the information minister. Never heard from them. We submitted it twice through, of course, anti-colonial Israeli activists who help us throughout the process, from Zocharot, who believe in decolonizing the Israeli mind. Anyway, so I thought that was very important to highlight. And later, I hope someone could ask me about knowledge production, because I have other interesting stories about this specific clip and how it has been used in social media. The next clip is going to be something that you will not see in the film, or for those of you who saw the film, it's not in the film, which is an extra segment on the massacre of Deir Aylabun, which is a very interesting story, because Aylabun and its neighboring town, Farade, so terrible massacres, including, shooting young men in the church of the village in Aylabun, and other atrocities. But there is very little to document that. Like when we look in the books and in articles, there was very little mention of, especially Farade, more than Aylabun. And Aylabun has been probably better documented, and we found one survivor of Farade in the Shatira refugee camp. We have her full interview, but we couldn't include everything on the film, of course, because it was long already. So let me share my screen and show you. As I said, this is something you are not going to see in the film itself.
Israelis committed more atrocities in their campaigns in the Negev and the Galilee than in any of their previous campaigns. In the Galilee, one of the many villages taken by Israelis was Aylabun.
دخلوا فرقتين من قبل ومن شرقاء، اختاروا 18 شخص اقطعوها من بين الناس وقالوا للباقي البلد على لبنان. الثمن ال 18 اختارونا 5، انا كنت واحد منهم. القائد الحمله قال تاخذوا هاي السياره وبتطلعوا بتكونوا قدام الجيش، اذا في الغام في شيء بتطلع فيكم.
The 13 Palestinian men who remained were divided into groups and shot by Israeli soldiers.
In each village, when some people stayed, they came in and they killed something like 10, 15 people in front of the others. So the rest who decided to risk it and stay got up and left.
Soon, the Israelis who had forced Farid Zreik to ride at the front of their convoy allowed him to leave. They gave him a letter permitting him to go to a nearby village. On the way there, he stopped at Faradia. At that village, he once again found himself being lined up by Israeli soldiers. Also there was Fatum al-Ali.
So Fatum's, I did Fatum's interview in Shatila refugee camp. I just want to explain that. She's not in Palestine.
والله يا بنتي احنا طوعونا بقول لك قعدنا هيك بساحه كبيره ونزل الشباب استنى قاعدين ينحوا تعال تعال تعال
استختارونا كمان احنا مع اللي بدنا نطخون.
So Zreik, on the other hand, actually his family never left. He survived to tell the story and died 3 years ago, but he was in Palestine when we interviewed him before, a few years before his death.
قالوا لهذول اللي كانوا طخ ما بدكم تطخوا خذوا لكم 4-5 طخوات. بقولوا اولاد الساد ان اللي بدنا نحاربونا بعدين. يعني الفكره انه هاي الجمله بعدها بترن في ذهني من اللوم ولا ممكن انساها.
Before the Israelis opened fire, Zarek showed them the letter he had received from the previous military unit. They allowed him to leave unharmed. Other men there were not as fortunate.
نقوهن ووقفوه ومشوه. إذا حياة أبوه ستني وأخذني.
Okay, so as I said, this clip was not actually, or is not in the film. We had to take it out, and that's why it's not high definition and it's not edited with music, with the original music as the other clips. Actually, most of them were not extracted from the film. It's hard, actually. Most of them, we took them from the post-production period. So we are running out of time, so I'm going to jump into Lid and Ramle. I have 3 more clips. So Lid and Ramle, then I have the attempt to return, which is only 2 minutes, and the ending is only 2 minutes. But Lid and Ramle is very crucial, and I have to show it because it really summarizes the whole story of genocide in Palestine. It has irrefutable evidence that there was an ethnic expulsion order by Ben Gurion himself, and we have the order itself, which we translated from Hebrew. And also the testimonies of the Israelis who participated, gives you the full picture as an example of what happened across Palestine. So I'm going to start sharing immediately. Just 1 second. I wanted to share Erkar, but I don't think we have time, so I'm just going to go to Lid and Ramla at this point. 2 of the largest cities.
The truce ended on the 8th of July. The following day, Israel began Operation Danny. This operation targeted Ramla and Lydda, the 2 Palestinian towns that remained in central Israel and home to the international airport.
This was a very strategic area. Wheat fields, very fertile grain area. You had incoming Jewish refugees. So you wanted that land not only as territory, the buildings, but you wanted the food.
At the outset of the battle, Lieutenant Colonel Moshe Dagan took a column of vehicles and sped through Lydda, shooting at anything that moved. They left the streets strewn with the bodies of Arab men, women, and children, around 200 in all.
And the place was conquered easily because the Arab Legion only put there 1 company which left in the middle of the battle, and it was only the semi-regular, untrained, unweaponed local Arabs that had to defend. But a few hours after the conquest, apparently by mistake, a small group of 4 or 5 Jordanian armored cars burst into Lod, turned around and went back. The Lod people thought that the Arab long last comes to defend them and rose up with their own weapon. As a result, the Palmach people started to shoot around Ankardi.
The next morning, around 250 more Arabs lay dead. Israel's Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, went to Operation Danny headquarters to meet with its commanders, Yigal Allon and Itzhak Rabin. They asked Ben-Gurion what should be done with those who remained in Ramla and Lydda. According to Rabin, Ben-Gurion waved his hand in a gesture that said, "Drive them out." Shortly thereafter, Rabin issued orders for expulsion.
Well, they came into each house at gunpoint, you leave. Each family was taken outside their houses on the street, and then we had to walk into sort of gathering areas.
ואז ברגע
מסוים כנראה החליטו לגרש את הערבים משם. וגירשו אותם. ואנחנו ראינו את זה, כי הם עברו בדיוק על ידינו, על יד המשלט שלנו. אנחנו היינו במשלט שנקרא דיר אבו סלאמה, וכל השיירה הזאת עברה על ידינו.
Now we were sitting in Birzeit one afternoon, and then I watched the people of Ramle and Linda coming, walking all the way from Ramle. It was such a sad sight and very, very distressing.
We were lucky. They put us in a bus, not a truck. And we were driven to the border, and they started shooting over our heads to make us run.
Suddenly I seen those masses of people going to the checkpoint which we were commanded to man. And they were searched for valuables. And that reminded me very much the time when I was a child. We're starting to do the same thing. People have done that to us as Jews.
We were shocked to see these floods of people, sort of. I mean, waves and waves. I was sitting in my room up on a second floor. We couldn't believe we had to run down and see what was happening.
אנחנו היינו, לא רק אני, כולנו היינו בדיכאון. אנחנו פשוט נזכרנו בגלות שלנו. אנשים הולכים לגלות, זה היה מראה מאוד קשה. וכולנו היינו בשוק. זה היה מראה קשה מאוד.
Everybody, I mean, the school, the church opened their doors, and my aunt opened the storeroom. Whatever we had, whatever was there, we just started boiling eggs, boiling potatoes, making salad, and whatever. And they came just so exhausted. Some of them were even not coherent. The children died on the road. They couldn't cope with the walk. It was a very, very traumatic experience, a sight that I'll never forget.
There were Arabs standing between Lud and Ramle and crying. They want to get back to their homes. And I could do nothing. And I felt very strongly about it because I saw them standing there, no shoes, and now they have to start walking and looking for someplace else. Then came the night, and at night, I don't know how many, 15 or 16 or maybe 10, I can't remember, trucks full of people that just came on the ship from the Holocaust. And they took over the town in 5 minutes. And so the whole tragedy was there in one moment. Here are the Arabs who used to live there, and here people who come from the Auschwitz and Majdanek and all that. And they won. They took the city. And the Arabs had to go to Nablus and to Jenin and it's not that it's right or wrong, but it's just a fact.
Prior to the Israeli attack, 50 to 70,000 Arabs were living in Ramla and Lydda. Now, only hundreds remained.
They took the elder member of the family. He was maybe at the time, maybe he was 70 years old. And the soldier took his wallet. I remember this very, very well. So, anyway, they took more than the wallet. They took everything.
I just want to say that I highly recommend you watch the documentary itself, because as I said, it's a little bit different. So in this segment, we actually interviewed, what's his name? I forgot his first name. Yusuf Ben El-Aizer, who's someone who actually, during 1948, decided to abandon his Zionist ideology and leave Palestine totally. But he says something very important. So at the beginning of the film, we interview him talking about when we talk about the Holocaust, saying that his family were stopped by Nazi soldiers, and they took the wallet of the elder, a watch from his grandfather, I think, or an elder, in their group, in their family. And in the film, you see him reflect on that when Mazdan al-Khairi talks about how they took the money from his grandfather. So as I said, those are not exactly as there are extra things in the film. And of course, the sound sweetening and the lighting, fixing the lighting, and the original score, which cost us like $10,000 to create. All of these things make the viewership experience, of course, different, especially that it's not going to be through Zoom. So I just want to go back and highly recommend you watch the whole documentary. It's going to be different. And so we have two final clips. Now I'm going to show you Palestinians trying to go back. It's a very short one. And immediately after, I will just play the final one, which is the ending of the documentary. So, and then we can open it for Q&A. And please bear with me. Let me see if I could do no, I still can't do the optimization, sorry. I think it has to do with how it was done. Again, this is a little bit different than what you see in the documentary itself.
Nobody had an idea that this is complete expulsion. It's a kind of war which will stop one day and you go back home. Wars happened all over the world. Towns have been occupied. Countries have been occupied. When the war was over, people got back home. Why should we be different?
Were this just an accident of war, then that accident of war would have been repaired within a few months of the implementation of Plan Dalet by the return of these people to their villages. They were not allowed to return.
And I just want to explain quickly, Plan Dalet is the master ethnic cleansing or ethnic expulsion plan that became controversial because, historians like Benny Morris justifies it and says, well, it wasn't, an ethnic cleansing plan. It was a plan that gives, direction on what happens if war happens, for the Zionists. While Rashid Khalidi at the beginning of, you will see those at the beginning of the documentary, of course, refutes that and says, the devil is in the detail. When you read the orders that came out of Plan Dalet, these are very clear. They actually say expel the population, burn cities, destroy homes, etc.
האחרונים של המלחמה, היו ניסיונות לא לחזור אולי, אבל להסתנן, לקחת ציוד וכן הלאה.
هلا بعد ما هالفعل 5 6 اشهر 7 اشهر المصاري الان مطلعينها خلصت البلد فيها الشغل واواعينا اللي لابسينها مزعت شو بدنا نعمل؟ الله ابوي لامي قال لنا نازل على فلسطين كيف بدك تنزل؟ قال لنا نازل ونازل على الكابري اذا رجعت بعد 15 يوم رجعت ما رجعت بكون انقتلت.
Then one day we got an order to take the jeeps and spread out and to shoot every Arab whom we saw coming back. And this is what happened.
The thinking behind this was political, but essentially strategic. The Arabs, refugees who had been fighting, they were the Palestinians who had been fighting against the Jews. And they said, if we allow these back, they will overwhelm us as a fifth column, or they will overwhelm us demographically. In other words, there will be hundreds of thousands of additional Arabs, and they will become a majority or close to a majority instantly if they return. So the Israeli cabinet decided not to allow them back.
And they still,
we now must conclude that there was a recognition, at least on the part of that early Israeli government, that the displacement of Palestinians was necessary for what they probably viewed as the viability of their state.
For me personally, it took the shape of an inner decision of myself.
I just want to warn you all that what you're going to hear is going to be a little bit hard to listen to but I think it's really a summary of the Israeli mentality nowadays and how the Zionists also justified crimes that, any human being wouldn't be able to do.
You wanted a war, okay. Now you run away, you'll never come back. So the notion of having this land empty of Arabs was already part of my life.
وأمي تبكي وتقول خلاص يعني ما في أمل قتلوا مات.
was a kind of manhunt in a way. I was very happy when the Arab made it and disappeared beyond the hill.
I was lying in an ambush. These were Palestinians who came back to the fields to reap the harvest.
So listen to him, reap the harvest, he knows.
Was going in the front to make sure that the road is open. And I was lying across the road with a revolver in my hand. And as he approached me, I stood up and he was a meter from me. He was so frightened that he embraced me. Then I became frightened. I didn't know what he has, a weapon, a revolver, a knife. So I shot at him. And that's a very strange experience. He fell to the ground from my hand. So I was killing a man on blank, just right there. I didn't blame myself. I didn't have any feeling of remorse because I had no chance. I had to do it. It was only natural that I should have reacted the way I reacted. So that's on the other hand. But I looked down on said, I said, poor fellow, got it.
بعد شهرين لا اجى ابوي علينا نزل من ناحيه الجبال وسقط على البلد ووصل للبيت لعنا ولقى البيت البلد كله مهدوم سقف البيت كله يعني كل سقف الارض نازل مثل ما هو كسر البطون ونشر الحديد وبحش الجوره طال المرتبان الازاز كب المرتبان حمل المصريات حطم بعبه وطلع.
So we also try to have glimpses of hope because, audiences also reported fatigue of seeing all the massacres and terrible things. And I think one important thing before I play the conclusion is to say that we also intentionally wanted to show the agency also among Palestinians that they didn't just surrender, they really tried hard to fight back. And we show Marakat al-Qastal or Qastal battle. We talk about Abdul Qadir al-Husseini and how amazing of a hero he was and all of these things. So I just wanted to say that it's a mistake when people try to just show Palestinians as only victims. They really tried to resist and defend themselves and defend their lands, but they were, massively outpowered, not outnumbered, but outpowered with the help, of course, of the British and other European forces and later the Americans.
مأساة إني أترك بلدي وملكي وأرضي وبيتي وأطلع منه مشرد لاجئ. هاي أكبر مأساة.
Imagine yourself, if you are living in your home, suddenly you find yourself only with a shirt, nothing more. Your past is denied. They say there are no Palestinians. Nobody was living here.
לא היו אפשרויות רבות. זאת אומרת, זה היה או אנחנו או הם, זה ברור. כי אם הם היו מנצחים, לא היינו אנחנו פה. ואסור, וכל נסיגה הייתה יכולה להיות סוף של מדינת ישראל, זה לא ש... אז זהו, אז אנחנו עוד לא היינו, ידענו ש... אני לא יודע אם כולם ידעו, אני ככה הרגשתי.
Refugees from the 1948 war and their descendants now number over 5 million. Many have spent their entire lives in the same refugee camps.
بلدي، أنا رحت زرتها، هو أشوف بلدي جندي ساكنين فيها يهود أوروبيين نقاشين يعملوا تماثيل وتماثيل وش بدنا. باجي بدي أطلع على الدار اللي كنت ساكن فيها، كل شو بدك؟ قلت له هاي والله داري اللي كنت ساكن. كان لا داري ولا دار، كان الدار اللي بسكن. يهودي بتقول لي اللي بسكن.
The Zionist movement was successful in establishing the State of Israel. But the dream of a safe haven for the Jewish people has not been realized. Since the end of the 1948 war, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has only grown more complicated and intractable. And the hopes, fears, and grievances that drove the conflict in 1948 are still central to the conflict today. Israelis build more and more settlements in the occupied West Bank, and Palestinians continue to be cut off from their homes and livelihood by military occupation, home demolition, checkpoints, curfews, and the construction of a wall that runs deep into Palestinian territory. As a result, Israel now controls nearly all of historic Palestine.
Here's the question. Was the establishment of the State of Israel so important that no matter what price Palestinians had to pay for it, it was worth it? Or was there something fundamentally wrong with a project that can only be realized by displacing hundreds of thousands of people? If the establishment of the State of Israel was a historic wrong, then the question now arises, how does one redress this wrong?
That's the credits, but you can view them later. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry. We started late, so I timed myself as starting at the beginning, and we need to take questions.
I'm going to start us off. Ahlam, I first want to say that that was so beautiful, so powerful, and I think so needed. So thank you for making that, for showing it for us today. Yeah, I can't tell you how moving it was to see those clips, and I'm excited to see the whole thing. I wanted to start us off really asking about the process. You said it took 8 years, and which is an incredible amount of time, and I'm wondering how you kept the momentum, what the process looked like throughout the 8 years. Did you how did you envision it to begin, and then how has it ended? What is the kind of change? Has there been a fundamental change, or did you kind of have this vision throughout?
Thank you for the question, Randa. First, it took way more than 8 years. Actually, the actual making was 10 years. But people think that you make a film and then that's it. That's your role as a filmmaker. But honestly, a lot of work came after. So and since 2017, Andy and I have been doing so much work in terms of making sure that you don't make a film and you invest all the. And by the way, this is a non-profit project. Not only that, we don't make money. Actually, we have been paying out of our pocket to the extent that last week Andy told me that in the film budget itself, we don't have money to pay for the person who does the taxes for us, because the film is registered as LLC. So they won't go after us in this space. And I told him, let's just pay for it out of our, even like the taxes we have to pay for the film. We don't even have money to cover that. So I just wanted to explain that. But still, this is something that we have such deep belief in, that really what motivated us. We gave up sometimes. At one point, I think when I had my child, I stopped working on it. I was so overwhelmed. I was teaching full time. I was going through 10-year promotion that year, had my baby, didn't have any family members to help me or any support. It was very depressing year of my life, honestly, and I totally stopped. And I have to give it to Andy because he kept going. Although Andy has no relationship to the topic whatsoever, as I said, before, just an average American person. And I think when you believe in a narrative, when you believe in the importance of telling a story, that motivates you. There were times, ups and downs, really. And so, for example, in 2014, when we wanted to do the post-production, as I said, the Israeli invasion of Gaza happened, and that had the detrimental impact on me. I couldn't work again. And Andy had to pick up a lot of the work. And I was basically in demonstrations, really losing my mind over what was happening in Gaza at that time. Also, when I came back from Lebanon, and like when you are doing the work, so for a whole month, I filmed every day of the week except Sundays. I went with the crew in the early morning, came back at 9, every day. It was August, hot and humid in 2018. And people ask me, like, how did you manage? Like, how did you take in all these interviews? Because I collected a lot of interviews. In total, we have over 100 interviews. We used only 33, by the way, in the film. And I said, well, it was like on auto drive mode, like you just do the work, think about logistics, make sure I have money to pay, the crew, make sure, we have the equipment, we don't forget anything, have a lineup of the interviews, we have fixers and production assistants to help us, etc. It was only when I came back to the States and I started, well, the first round was when I captured all the interviews, had to download them and save them and send. I have to back up all my work because I was afraid we might lose them. So I sent that hard drive to Andy by mail, by registered mail. I sent 2 actually. And when I was downloading, this is when I started thinking, oh my God, was I paying attention when they were talking? I don't remember this, So that's when it started hitting me. And when I came here and started working with Andy, it was very depressing process, very, very depressing. The editing itself, by the way, we were the first people in the world to use Zoom, and we used it for editing, and this was in 2014, when no one knew what Zoom was. Because first, Andy and I, who live in San Diego, we are an hour away. We tried to do the editing in our houses, go back and forth, and that took forever, a lot of times. Then we figured out a way actually to do all the editing, spend thousands of hours doing the editing. And that was also very depressing to have. And also deciding what to cut and what to keep. People think it's the most difficult thing. And at the end, we had to cut down to the fraction of a minute sometimes. Now we are trying to take all the wealth of information we collected and put all the interviews online, but it's not easy. We still have to hire people, a bilingual editor who could go through. And bilingual, I mean sometimes bilingual Arabic, English, and sometimes Hebrew, English, depending on the interviews, and clean them up, and just have the interview itself and put all the transcriptions over and publish them on our website. So we are still like, this film is going to be with us for a long, long period of time. And also we want to share all the documents we collected. We collected over 1,500 images, but those are very expensive for you. So we only used the ones we could afford to pay for. Pictures cost us probably over $25,000. Of course, the budget, doing all crowdsourcing. This is a community project. Over 500 people helped make this a success. We did fundraisers, community fundraisers, PAWA, Palestinian American Women Organization, Al-Auda, Jewish Voice for Peace, Karama in San Diego. Many, many organizations came to help us, especially in Southern California, and did fundraisers for us. We did Kickstarter campaigns online. This is the way we were able to do something out of nothing, really. In addition to all the thousands of hours we put into this work and out of our own pockets, me and Andy.
Thank you so much, Dr. Muhtasib, for this beautiful portrayal of the film and the labor, the collective labor of love and the hard work that goes into making these films. I do have a question for you, and also I just want to draw your attention to some of the beautiful comments you're receiving in the chat. A lot of people are talking about how important this film has been for them, for their congregations and their communities and their families. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that. My question, I was struck by two things. One, the multiplicity of archives and notions of archives that are working throughout the film and the documentary. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that. Like, what is the archive through which you built this really important work and the multiple narratives that are shown in this work? And I'm thinking of this particularly in relation to the discovery of the Tantura massacre this summer by Israeli archivists. So the kind of corroboration of a story that was already known to us, those of us who are survivors of the Nakba, and our families and the histories that we already know and learn in different languages and different contexts. So I would like you perhaps to comment a little bit about that. And the second is, I think, on this day, I think it's really important and moving to hear and see these narratives. So I was wondering if you could comment a little bit about the significance of thinking about the Nakba as an ongoing event, right? So what Patrick Wolf, what other settler colonial scholars, what indigenous people teach us, which is that the settler colonialism is a structure and not an event. So what does it mean to watch this? And what is the power that happens through watching such recollections, such memories, and such stories? Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. I'll start with the archive issue and talk about what we term as epistemic violence, right? It's part of the whole structure of epistemic violence in terms of control of narratives, control of knowledge production, different methods of control, restructuring narratives, of course, to suit a meta-narrative of colonization and occupation, etc. So that's part of the whole different forms of violence, colonial violence in this case, right? You mentioned Tantura, and that's very interesting. So I have some insider information about the Tantura film that was released. I don't know how much I could reveal but let me say that one of my dear friends that I have been helping as a filmmaker, an emerging filmmaker, is Hala Jibril. I don't know if people know her. Hala is from Tantura. Her family is from Tantura, and she started working on a film about her family's narrative that, of course, was expanded to include, similar things to what I did, going into the archives, etc. Lack of funding, of course, and lack of support impacted her ability to finish. Her film has been going on for over 12 or 13 years. The Israelis who did the film on Tantura, contacted her, tried to take some of her work, told her, we want to cooperate with you. She refused. She said, no, this is different. This is very personal to me. It's part of, she wanted to do it as a Palestinian narrative. And unfortunately, because she was not able to finish her film, they kind of preempted her film and released theirs. Now, I haven't seen the film. I intended to see it, but I looked at some of the released, segments and also the trailer. And I talked to other people, and they said no Palestinians were interviewed. Now, I can't say for sure because I haven't seen the film. But if that were the case, that tells you the importance of having those kinds of films made by Palestinians. Israelis with the best intentions, even those who claim, of course, decolonial, anti-colonial approaches, some of them are fantastic, we work with. But the majority, even among those minority, scholars and filmmakers, would make those mistakes. For example, if you take Muhammad Yaqub's film of a frame and compare it to a very similar frame by Rana Sila, who's an Israeli, according to her, a decolonial scholar. She did, what was her film? Looted and Hidden. I don't know if you've seen any of those films, which is both of them are good films. Of course, Muhammad Yaqub is, as a Palestinian, of course, provides a very different approach to filmmaking than that of Rana Sila. And Rana Sila fell into a lot of the traps of not recognizing her position of power, even in terms of trying to decolonize in knowledge production, right? So it's interesting, just because you mentioned Tantura, and I was like, I have some issues, with maybe because of my insider information, I hope that Hala would release her film because her film is unbelievable. This is a film that I highly suggest we all like come as a community and support her to the finish line. This was what impacted our ability to finish. If you have to put food on the table, if you have to maintain your job, you know, you can't, and you want to do a film. That was Andy and my story also. Depending on our work, sometimes we couldn't work. You know, Andy got a new position in LA that impacted his ability to do his work. When I was going through tenure and promotion, I couldn't. And the other question, I forgot the other part of your question, Nana. You have to remind me.
I think you kind of merged them together in a really beautiful and brilliant way. But one was about Tantura and the archive, and the second is about the power of thinking about the Nakba on the day of the Nakba, yes, recognizing it as a structure and not an event.
Yes, that's an excellent question. And I will start probably in a untraditional way because we're thinking about indigenous scholars and how we, as indigenous scholars think about that. And actually, I had conversations with some really amazing indigenous intellectuals and scholars from the Turtle Islands, right, United States, and they push against the use of settler colonial framework. They said that language is very important, and when you say settler, and I know we have a whole literature and I had some discussions with Lubna Qatami before, I remember, and other scholars. But actually, a lot of that research comes from white scholars also. But anyway, they say the act of settlement is not does not indicate or show or expose the violence in that act of settlement. Like we are settling, they're saying, well, we are settlers. We came and settled the land, right? How are we different? And I think when I had that conversation with them, and I was trying to say, well, it's like a more of a framework, but they were pushing back and saying, well, the terminology is very important also. And one of them is Professor James Fenelon, who is actually a colleague of mine, one of the elders in his community. He's an amazing scholar and did actually indigenous work on the Bedouins and Naqab. So he has he knows a lot about the two contexts, and he was in conversations also with elders who push against not only scholars but actually like indigenous communities. And that made me think back when I was in Palestine growing up. We didn't used to say settlements, mustawtanat. That's actually a new term if you think about it. We used to call them musta'marat. Mustamara is a colony. So we actually, as Palestinians, early on, unfortunately that language is now merged and people don't even think about it. But when I started thinking back about how we thought about them, we've always used musta'marat, colonies, and not mustawtanat, settlements. And so I want to start there because I think, it's just to open up the door for reconceptualizing our way of thinking about what we term as settler colonialism and maybe think of it in other terms. But in terms of the process, so it's a structure, it's a systematic thing, right? And it's ongoing and it serves, at the same time, I want to push back and say, as also an indigenous Palestinian, it has a counter structure of resistance. And for me, I would love to highlight the resistance as well. My latest study that I'm conducting now, which I presented over a month ago at Arab Studies Quarterly Conference, our focus was on digital resistance because that's the new form. And when I talked about Deir Yassin, I said, I hope I will have time to discuss new modes of production of knowledge and media. So let me give you a very quick example. I know we're running out of time. So the clip on Deir Yassin. One of the content creators, I know that's not the best, but let's call him a Palestinian activist on Instagram, Subhi, I forgot his last name. He goes by Sbeh on Instagram. Has millions of followers now, which is very important actually platform to decolonize, right? He posted that only 1 minute of Uthman Aql talking about the bakery story on Instagram. We have been screening all over the world, and the film had been adopted by many classes. So thousands of students now watch it every semester, which I'm very proud of. That was, our alternative mode of distribution, not only in terms of production. But one clip that he posted generated in 2 days 500,000 views last year, in May of last year. Today I was pleasantly surprised that he reposted it, the same exact clip, in like literally 5-10 minutes. It was up to 2,000 views and likes and shares. And that was like, before we started, so I have no idea how is it now. But that shows you also the power, the importance of thinking a little bit different in terms of reaching, audiences, and in terms of, having some success in our opposition to the structure of colonialism. It's this opposing, important aspect of it is the resistant aspect. And I think we have to center that and amplify it, and maybe have a workshop, by Palestine Feminist Collective on new approaches actually of knowledge production and media production. Sorry if I took too long.
Thank you so much for that. I just want to invite the participants, if you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and or add your questions into the chat box if you're looking there. Any comments, any questions? I know that we're running a little bit late. We apologize for the late start. Perhaps we can have 1 or 2 last questions and or comments.
And while you take the question, just to respond to the person who said, where can we watch the film? The film is on Canopy. If you are in a college or university, it would be great if you can order the academic license, because this is the best way to have thousands of students have access to it. It's on, unfortunately, Amazon Prime, but that's our distributor. As I said, we don't make any money. And it's on iTunes and Google Play. Please make sure you leave if you want to rent it or buy it, a positive comment, because we have been attacked by the Zionists over and over. And it is on Tubi for free, but with commercials, for United States and Canada, on Vimeo and other, platforms that I can't remember the rest of them. Hulu and Hoopla, not Hulu, but Hoopla. So.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm not seeing any final questions. Oh, I think there's one that just appeared in the chat. I will just quickly read it. So how do you see the role of evangelicals in resolving this occupation and the occupations of other colonized lands?
Evangelicals?
That is what the question says, yes.
You tell me. I have no idea. I heard about like an oppositional group in the evangelical church who are trying to defy against, the mainstream evangelical church of blind support of Israel, of course, for their own religious reasons that I think are very anti-Semitic to start with. But I don't have much information about that, honestly. So I don't know. The person who asked might have more information than me.
Thank you. Another question is, what were the films that you mentioned to underscore the difference between Palestinian voice and the Israeli decolonial scholar?
Sorry, again? I didn't hear the last.
What were the films that you mentioned to underscore the difference between Palestinian voice and the Israeli decolonial scholar?
I mean, those were 2 examples. There are several, but Rana Sila, who's an Israeli scholar, I could put them in the chat if it's easier, made a film called Looted and Hidden. The film is not necessarily bad, but I mean, you could tell from the first moment, of course, the perspective would be different. For example, there was a film made by Rana Sila, but it was based on looted archives. So there was like that ethical dilemma in the whole process. And also the fact that she brought in an Israeli soldier as a participant in the film without nuancing his role, or like, it was a good first attempt, but it needed some better work. And also she based all of her materials on the work of Khadija مرت علي أبو مصطفى Mustafa Abu Ali, you know, the famous Palestinian filmmaker of the revolution. His wife did a lot of films, and she was a, you know, a revolutionary filmmaker. So she used a lot of her materials and interviewed her. So she put her voice in the film. But I would list her as a filmmaker in this case, and not those are the examples where, and I could go on. I teach that class in my Palestinian cinema class, which is settler colonialism and Palestinian cinema. So I use settler colonialism in that class. And the other film, on the other hand, which tackled a very similar topic, was Muhannad Yaqoubi, who did Off of Frame, I think. And Muhannad, so if you also compare access to information between a Palestinian filmmaker, also as a scholar, and an Israeli filmmaker scholar, she had easy access. She actually came across those looted and hidden archives by coincidence when she was allowed to go into Israeli archives and do her research. And she came across them, but they were just thrown basically in the dungeons. While Muhannad Yaqoubi had to trace those films around the world. He literally released those revolutionary films country by country, trying to find them wherever he could reach them and make his film. And they came out at almost the same time, the same year. And it was just very interesting to see the difference in you know, when the filmmaker is Palestinian or Israeli. But I just want to warn, you know, please, when you watch films, to be careful when, especially production money is Israeli. I mean, sometimes people think, oh, this is a new Palestinian film because the topic is Palestinian, or maybe an actress is Palestinian, etc. Some of these films could be very harmful because they really follow a very colonial, typical narrative line, and are not necessarily, you know, accurate representation of our society, our community. Even if if the filmmaker is Palestinian, if the production money is Israeli, it could be very, very problematic. And I have examples I don't want to share today, maybe later.
Well, I think we've reached the end time for this event. Thank you so much, Dr. Muhtasib, for sharing your knowledge with us, for teaching us about your film, and for commemorating al-Nakba and the murder of Shireen Abu Akleh with us today. Thank you everyone who participated online for joining us and for being so patient with us as we sorted out some technological hiccups. Thank you to everyone who's done labor to make this event possible, both the visible and invisible forms of labor that make such events possible. And thank you to the Palestinian Feminist Collective. Very grateful to all of you. Thank you again. We will close the Zoom now. I'll ask the moderators and main event participants and organizers to remain if that's possible. Thank you again, everybody. We appreciate you.